All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. It's nice to be back. I missed the last two sessions just because in December life happened really quickly and I just wasn't able to come out. So apologies for not being able to host the session for a little bit. But I'm really glad to be back. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jamal. I'm on the executive team. I am the content manager. So I'm really happy to have another session today. We have some really cool stuff planned. We'll obviously start with our news roundup, which we're going to get started on right away. And then we have a wonderful presentation from Todd, correct?
Yep.
Nice to meet you. I'm glad to have you here. I can't wait to hear what you are going to be talking to us about today. So without further ado, let's get started with some news. Jack, if you want to take the floor.
Alright, so this story goes out to all my gamers and gamblers in the audience. So last month, Valve had to patch a flaw in Counter-Strike 2, which players were abusing to inject images into the game. So injection attacks, basically it's a wide range of attacks. So you got your SQL injection, injecting malicious SQL queries, command injection, OS commands. HTML injection was this one. So players were injecting their own HTML elements, mainly images. So to exploit it, if you see on the image there, hopefully the mic still picked me up okay, players would have to name themselves the HTML element, and then they would have to call a vote to kick themselves out of the game. So once this vote panel showed up on player screens, instead of displaying the player's name as usual, the image they referenced would pop up for the players to see. Now, when this vulnerability first dropped, there was a lot of fear that this was a more sinister XSS cross-site scripting vulnerability, which would allow them to inject JavaScript, and that would have much worse consequences. However, this flaw was simply HTML injection. From my understanding, it's because the specific element which was vulnerable didn't have JavaScript enabled, so all they could do was HTML injection. And that's pretty limited as far as vulnerabilities go. Players were able to demonstrate they could get the IP address. So if they hosted the image on a server they controlled, when the players would see the image, when their devices would contact the server to retrieve the image, that server could log their IP address. With this information, the attacker could launch a denial of service attack, which might sound bad for a game specifically because you might be thinking, oh, an opponent can get my IP address and then kick me out of the game. Not really, because the way this vote works is when you initiate the vote, only your teammates are going to see it. So the attacker can only get the IP addresses of your teammates and denial of service them. So not much of a competitive advantage if you're launching a DOS against your own teammate, unless your teammate's Kyle. Hopefully he's watching right now. Yeah, so a similar issue though was present in 2019 with CSGO. That one could lead to XSS. I'll drop the HackerOne report because it is a pretty interesting read. But yeah, that's it for this one.
All right, this one here is an update on a segment from last session. So if you don't know, I'll give you a quick summary. Basically, Fidelity National Financial came under attack from a cyber attack. Black Cat was the group that claimed responsibility on their own darknet forum. Basically, what happened is they were attacked and they shut down all of their servers across everything, and it lasted for 1 week. Nobody could access their mortgage information. They couldn't get any of their money out of the bank from when they sold their house. Nobody could pay their mortgages. And the only thing that they could get was an automated response saying that some kind of catastrophe happened on their end. So for the entire week, nothing could happen from anybody. And then recently, with a filing from the SEC, they just announced that approximately 1.3 million people's information could have been stolen. They had no specifics on what the exact content that was stolen was, and they're not giving any other details to anybody else. That was pretty much it, though. They basically just said that most likely data was stolen, and they didn't admit that it was a ransomware as it was expected to be before. All they said is that they just had some kind of malware that was installed in their system and it exfiltrated data away. And this also shows a trend in groups targeting the mortgage and loan industry, from Loan Depot and Mr. Cooper. Mr. Cooper actually had a worse one where I think it was 14 million customer information ended up getting exfiltrated. But yeah, I guess people are attacking mortgage and loans.
So my story was about an iOS zero-click vulnerability that was discovered by Kaspersky because they were targeted. It wasn't exactly just one vulnerability that was discovered. They discovered it was a lot of them being used at the same time to attack their devices. They said that in a technical write-up, they found one particular issue that allows a JavaScript exploit on part of the hardware to where they can write memory to one of the firmware chips that's being used. In June, they disclosed these attacks, but ever since then, they've been coming out with more and more technical writings as to what they've found and what they've been able to break down. So I've included those posts here, which are good reads. They're about just kind of the exploits they've been able to find and what they've been able to find so far. As for the actual writing to that specific chip, they haven't been able to find any type of documentation from Apple. They haven't obtained any documentation from Apple to say specifically why that chip had blank memory left. They think it might have just been for like error testing or for different types of testing they wanted to do, but they haven't gotten any answer from Apple, so it's still kind of unsure as to why this vulnerability came to be, but they're keeping it updated on their website. So again, it's a good read. Those two articles that I linked are great to see all the exploits that were used, and then they go a lot more in depth on this one specific hardware chip and specifically how they exploited it.
Alrighty. So this is just one of many articles that I found actually related to healthcare centers and healthcare companies being hacked recently. I found this one interesting for a couple of reasons. One thing I just couldn't find out was how the actual hack took place, other than the company finding some unauthorized access on some of their network devices. I did some digging to find potentially what could have been a vulnerability, but essentially in May of last year, Norton Healthcare discovered that they had been breached. The breach included all this information here, and Black Cat actually took or claimed that they were the ones that did it. Of course, with like every hack that's like happening nowadays, I swear it's always these guys. It was 4.7 terabytes of data, including patient information, photos, financial records, employee data, and social security numbers, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. And this was actually in Maine, but this isn't just like a US thing. I was doing some looking around, and just from last month to now, there's been 5 breaches in Ontario for different like medical centers, and hospitals have had a lot of their data breached recently. So I'm very curious as to why medical records are being like, or medical companies are being like accessed so often. I'm sure the information is very valuable on like the darknet or to sell for some reason, but it's very cool. Now they didn't list actually why or how the hack happened, but I did some digging on the internet, and apparently this entire medical facility called Norton Healthcare, every single one of their devices was still running Windows Vista in 2023. So I'm just gonna go out on a limb here and say it probably had something to do with it. And something also very interesting I find is that this happened in May of last year, but it wasn't actually like made public until December of last year, which is like half of the year. And the only reason it was public is because they had to file it with the Maine Attorney General. So it's like you had 6 months of time basically where you'd have no idea that your medical records could have been accessed. And you know, all this time, you know, they got their stuff back, they were able to recover everything, but if I was a customer, you know, and my medical records got access, for God's sakes, like I would want to know right away as opposed to having to find out from like a filing at the Attorney General. So this is all really weird. I think I'm gonna like start covering this more often because this is happening a lot, especially even close to home. So maybe I'll try to find some more local ones and present them for you next week. But thank you so much.
Cool. Hope everybody can hear me okay. My name's Todd Brecher. I'm a manager with KPMG. I work in cyber defense. I'm here to talk today a little bit about soft skills, the importance of your soft skills in cyber. I think that, you know, being in a technical field, certainly in technical post-secondary education, we have a tendency to lean into our technical skills, and you got to stay sharp. But at the same time, it's also important to remember when you're trying to build a career and not just land a job, you need to think beyond your immediate role and responsibilities. You need to think beyond, you know, what you're capable of and into the realm of how are you going to build yourself up? How are you going to move forward, and who are you going to work with? How are you going to work with them? So today, got to talk, put together a little bit of short notice. I apologize if it's a little scuffed. Talking a little bit about, you know, the importance of these soft skills. So let's dive in. First things first, a little about me, a couple of things you should know. I'm a dropout. I started at University of Guelph in environmental toxicology, so I pivoted super hard into cyber. I came from environmental and human health risk assessment, so I was doing pesticide toxicology risk communication. Very, very different field before I took on a sales job, worked for a company called ISSessions, which you guys might be familiar with, fell in love with the security industry and decided that I was going to go back to school for it. I started with KPMG in 2021 over COVID, so I joined as a consultant in cyber defense. Since then, I've risen into a manager role, and now I lead a team mostly dealing with technical security assessment work. So we do the pen testing, the red teaming, the purple teaming, the web application security assessment, as well as some sort of strategic advisory on the defense side of things. Just got my CISSP yesterday, so pretty happy with that. Woo! I've done a lot of things. You know, I'm feeling a little bit like an old man every day now. So, you know, I got enough grays in my beard that it's starting to become apparent. One thing that I've come to reflect on and realize is there's a common thread in a lot of what I've done. And the most important thing is communication. It doesn't matter whether I was working in a Best Buy or whether I was doing pesticide risk assessment communication and scientific advisory work, or whether I'm doing cybersecurity advisory work now, the common thread is communication. The other thing that I've come to realize is, as far as my coming career in cyber, soft skills are really important, not just because I work as a consultant. Today's content is partially themed from the lens of a consultant, but I think it is broadly applicable for anybody who wants to, again, build a career in cyber, not just have a job working in cyber, okay? Let me ask you guys a question, open question. Who do you think a consultant actually works for? Like, who are the people that I talk to at my clients? Who are my clients? Any ideas?
Project managers,
Okay.
various companies,
Who else?
computer software developers, stuff like that.
Sure, maybe a couple of technical resources. Who do you think the majority of my client base is? Who?
Salespeople?
Rarely sales.
Management?
Management, yeah.
HR.
HR occasionally. Who else?
CEO?
C-suite. For sure. That's the first on my list. VPs, senior leadership, executive directors. Like, these are all bigwig titles, right? Other leaders, mostly. How many of these people do you think are actually technical?
None of them.
Right. Now, it's not to say that they don't have subject matter expertise. It's not to say that, you know, my clients are less knowledgeable or that they're not suited to the roles. But their role in leadership is to be making decisions, not necessarily to be, you know, sharp as a knife's edge. They're not the technical resources that are doing the implementation. Instead, these guys are shouldering the accountability. So they're responsible for this work getting done, and I interface with them, my team does the work for them, that kind of thing. But are they the technical folks? Not really. Most of them are not. So why focus on soft skills? I mentioned, you know, I think it's a really common misconception that us as security professionals must be deeply technical, or that the only value that we have to bring to the table is our technical skills. That's not the case. In fact, I think that the most value we can bring to the table is when we're bridging gaps between technical and non-technical resources. That's why I operate in consulting, right? One thing that you'll come to learn as you gain more experience in the industry is there are so many roles, there are so many different job titles, so many different things you could be doing in this space that, you know, many of the people in your own classes, none of you guys will have the same jobs. That means that there's a lot of different ways that people generate value in this industry, right? What's the common thread? What does every single person that you know, that every single, you know, in every single different job role, every job silo do? They communicate with other people, they collaborate, they work inside of a company or with other companies, between people, right? And then again, back to the idea of value, right? What do you actually bring to the table? Is it your hard skills or your soft skills? Is it the fact that you're able to get the work done, or is it the fact that you're, you know, making the work that you've done something usable, right? I'll ask a little bit of a rhetorical question here, okay? Imagine you're a pen tester and you're giving a report to a client, okay? What is more valuable? Is it the penetration testing services that you've provided, the actual work, doing the pen test? Or is it the report that you've generated and given to the client? Now, to be clear, I don't think that there is a single answer to this question. Both are important. You can't have one without the other, right? It's a little bit of a tricky question, but it's a good one to think about because, again, think about where the client sees value, or think about where whoever you're working for is going to see value. It isn't necessarily just in the technical stuff. It's also in how it's presented and how it's communicated, right? Today, I kind of want to go through a couple of really important soft skills, starting with understanding your audience. So even today, understanding I'm speaking to students. I've tuned this talk to match my audience. So hopefully this will be useful for you guys. 2, make fast friends. Okay, it's important to be able to be sociable and personable when you need to. You don't necessarily need to be an extrovert. I'm certainly not, but you do need to be able to make fast friends. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Use plain language. How many times have you been speaking to somebody and heard an acronym you don't recognize, or you yourself have used an acronym? You ever tell your parents about what you learned in school? And they're like, whoa, hold on. What did you just say to me? Like, what is that? Like, yeah, use plain language. This is really important. Understated skill, something extremely valuable. People look for this. This is like a keyword. If there's anything to take away from today, plain language. Remember that. Be precise and concise. Say what you mean what you say. Be brief, be kind, be direct. This is really important. Tuning your communication, understanding your audience, all this stuff ties in real nicely. And number 5, being aware of nonverbals. Okay, I don't think the Discord folks can see me. That said, nonverbals are really important, and learning a little bit about some of the common things to be looking for, paying attention to, helping you to literally read the room or understand kind of the dynamic that you have, the rapport that you're building or not with a client or with somebody you're working with is really important to be able to tune your communication and kind of get things back on the rails. Let's start with understanding your audience. I think the first step of any communication is thinking about who am I communicating with. It's a two-way street. You need to understand who are you speaking with, who are you communicating with. If you want to communicate effectively, you got to start there. There are a couple of things that I like to do in order to be able to better understand who am I speaking to, how should I speak to them. First one being literally, who are they? What is their role? What do they do? How do I know them? Do we have any mutual friends? What is the context of my relationship with this person? Who are they to me? Start with who are you speaking to? The next being, how am I going to communicate with this person? What media should we use? Am I doing a business email? Am I doing a talk to ISSessions? Am I doing a phone call? Is it a video conference, right? What media should I be using to make this effective in the context of whatever it is? What is the context, right? Why am I reaching out to this person? Why am I communicating at all? Is this something that needs to be a meeting? Is this something that's better left as an email? All of this stuff needs to kind of inform your audience, your understanding of your audience. And last, but certainly not least, what is my core message? If I come up here and I give a talk, my core message is the one single thing that I want you guys to take away from this, right? Soft skills are important. What is your core message is the foundation of every good communication, because I tell you, if you're rambling and if you're kind of beating around the bush, people are not going to understand what you mean. And if they don't understand what you mean, you're going to have a real hard time, not just in your job, but in your career, long term. Another sort of rhetorical question, for argument's sake, right? Are you going to speak to a client or somebody important to you the same way that you'd speak with your coworkers or your classmates? Probably not, right? This is a pretty obvious example of where you need to consider who you're speaking with. What is the context of that communication? Because chances are it's very different. If I'm gonna shitpost in the Discord and meme around with you guys, that's very different from how I'm gonna be interacting with, the VPs at my clients. Very different. Definitely not. Making fast friends. I don't know how many of you guys have ever seen this book before. How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think this is a really interesting book. I am not going to get into the nuance of all the different strategies and methods that Dale provides in this book. I think this is a fantastic introduction to reading people and kind of understanding how to read the room, how to, again, make fast friends. One thing that I grew up hearing my dad say all the time, make friends and influence people, right? That's something that really stuck with me, and I realized that's more important for building a career than you might think, because again, it's not just about the job you have, it's also about the jobs you will have and the work you will undertake, the people you will meet in the future too. So winning friends and influencing people is very important. This also is going to tie in later to how we're going to talk about standing out in the job hunt, building your personal brand, right? If you are able to quickly build rapport with people in difficult situations, that's a very valuable skill in this industry, right? In many roles in security, you're dealing with sort of low trust, high risk situations where there are consequences in the decisions that you're making, and where the people who, they need to trust you to be making decisions or taking actions on their behalf, they probably don't have much to go on. So being able to win fast friends, build rapport, make friends, influence people, very, very good thing. Another thing that I think is very important when you think about the context of your career, being conscious about being well liked is important. It is not just enough to be the brightest person in the room, right? You can be an outstanding technical talent, you can be very good at your job, but if nobody likes to work with you, are you going to have a successful career? Probably not as easily. You're going to have to fill in the gaps there, right? Whereas if you are somebody who's well liked, somebody who has that ability to become trusted quickly, you're going to find a lot more people coming to you with opportunities that otherwise you probably wouldn't get exposure to. So making fast friends, it's an important skill, even if you aren't necessarily a very personable person. I certainly am not. Using plain language. I like to say that if you cannot explain something simply, you probably don't understand it well enough. Plain language is a major keyword. I'm going to come back to this as an idea of a keyword. It's something that throughout the entirety of my careers, every job that I've had, whether it was working at EB Games when I first started, all the way up through, going into Best Buy, doing sales for eCentire, technical sales, and then pivoting into now cyber consulting. When I'm speaking with my clients, I need to tune my communication again, understanding my audience, who am I speaking to? Using plain language is something that can really help your communication pretty much across the board. If you can simplify and you can be more eloquent in how you're going to be expressing yourself, you're going to make it much easier to understand your core message, right? In our field, there's a lot of jargon. We want to stay away from that, ideally, if we're going to be using plain language, so like avoiding acronyms, shorthands, things that are not recognizable to anybody who isn't in our field, because often the most important work we do is with people from outside of the security realm. They're people who are affected by security, but not necessarily security personnel themselves. Asking for communication. I will probably ask you guys, does that make sense? Pretty often. And the reason that I'm doing that is because seeking affirmation from your audience, making sure that they're following your message is an important and effective strategy for making sure people are engaged in how they're dealing with you, but also that they're following what you're actually saying. If you're giving them an opportunity to ask questions and speak up and say, hey, no, wait, hold on, I don't really get what you just said. That's a good way to guarantee that you're not going to be missing the mark on your communication. Another really important thing is ensuring your consistency in your terminology. If you're using plain language, you shouldn't be changing terms interchangeably for acronyms and things like that without some kind of prior warning. This is especially common. I see this in technical writing all the time, where people use a full hand and then they will switch to an acronym without including it in like brackets afterwards, things like that. In technical writing, it can make things difficult to follow, and you'll probably find even your professors will be calling you out on that stuff as well. If you include shorthands or acronyms, jargon, stuff like that, they're not doing it just because they're like nitpicking on your English or your grammar or whatever. It's meaningful. Like, you will do that at work for the rest of your career. So pay attention to that. Another thing that I really like, I had a client in Quebec who was, primarily their working language was French, but they followed something called the rule of one. Now, I'm not saying that you're always going to be working in a second language, but the rule of one is an interesting concept where, thinking back to how they operated, when there was a single person who would speak in English, they would all work in English. The rule of one was a means of tuning to the sort of lowest common denominator, or a baseline, if you will, in the meeting, and making sure that everybody was on the same page. You should always be trying to tune your communication to that rule of one, to whoever is that sort of baseline, because if you're speaking up over their head, there are going to be people left behind. And you don't want to leave behind somebody important, somebody who's making decisions, and somebody who may not have the technical expertise to follow the really jargon heavy, really technical conversation, right? So follow that baseline, tune your audience or your communications based on your audience, right? I'll give you guys an example. So a little case study here. KPMG, we had a client not long ago. It was a little bit of a mess where we had a sort of incident response ongoing while we were doing a pen test for a separate work stream. And the penetration test actually turned up a really interesting finding, something that we thought was serious enough that we had to issue an urgent memo in response. It was not just enough simply to include this in the report as like a, a critical finding, anything like that. This was like you gotta go fix this now. So what did we do? We prepared a memo. I think this is a really interesting example because this is less than 250 words. You can count it out, but I'm not going to. We don't have time for that today. Basically, giving everybody, what do you need to know about what the context of the engagement is, what did we find, what is the severity of the issue, and what is the risk, as well as what do you do about it in a super concise single email, right? Or in this case, a Word doc formatted nicely, whatever, because it's a client deliverable. That being said, when we had identified, in this case, it was a full remote RCE, or full RCE, I should say. It was a combination of a insecure deserialization for like a malicious file upload as well as an arbitrary RCE that was on a public-facing, internet-exposed endpoint. Like it was a web server. It was a kind of a big deal, right? Complicating the matter was the ongoing incident response. That there was maybe some evidence that this could have been like an initial point of compromise from prior incident as well. So when we had prepared this, we knew, okay, this is going straight to the top. We know that this is something that they need to action immediately. How are we going to do that? Well, we write a memo like this and we really flex the communication muscles. This is something that is inherently technical. But if you read this, anybody at the organization, that leadership team, should be able to glean enough of this to know, okay, this is a big finding. We found it during a regular engagement. This is a very atypical thing to find, and we got to do something about it now. So I think that's a pretty good example to come back to, right? Understanding your audience, tuning the communication. In this case, we know it's going to the top. We make it concise as can be. We give them all the information that they need, nothing of the fluff, none of the screenshots, none of that. They don't need that to make the decision, right? Instead, we have recommendations right at the bottom, and it includes literally the step-by-step. Upgrade the affected component, review the configuration, make sure it's actually working as intended, right? On the note of being precise and concise in your communication, okay? I'm gonna start with this.
I waste time, say lot word when few word do trick.
Of course, it doesn't work when I'm trying to play it, but I'll give it one more go.
I waste time, say lot word when few word do trick.
You guys hear that? Why waste time, say lot word when few word do trick? That is the dumbest smart sentence that I have ever heard, guys. Because it gets the point across so effectively. I have to credit my manager for this one. Your bottom line up front, this is super important, okay? You need to be very precise and concise in your language. Make sure that you are selective about the words that you are using. Every word that you use has meaning. And focusing on that can kind of elevate the service you're providing or the value you bring to a client or to an internal employer, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Start with your bottom line up front, bluff. It's military terminology. They do this because if you want an effective communication, it needs to be short, sweet, to the point, and direct, and it needs to get the point across. You can do that in your first line, bluff, bottom line up front. I also mentioned this phrase earlier, say what you mean and mean what you say, right? I think being very unambiguous in how you present your core message is a really important thing. If there's any room for interpretation, or you are having somebody proof your materials and they say, hey, whoa, hold on a minute. Do you mean this or do you mean that? You probably haven't written it as directly as you should have, and it's probably not as straightforward as you might think. When you read something, it might be different than how somebody else reads it, right? So say what you mean what you say, be direct. Be clear in how you're phrasing your ideas. So I think this comes to a logical piece. Consider, how are you laying things out? What is the logical reading order of your core message? Do you need to have, prerequisite knowledge to understand what you're trying to get across, that kind of thing? So be clear in how you're phrasing and organizing your ideas. Use appropriate language. So we talked about tuning your communication to your audience. Consider, are they going to understand the technical jargon, or do you need to trim that back? Things like that. And of course, be brief when possible, right? If you can say something in fewer words, you probably should, because the economy of, reading the emails that you write. I have a funny story here. I'm gonna throw my manager under the bus again. I asked for funding for my OSCP, okay? And I wrote, it was like a 2,000 word email. Pavan's probably watching this and cringing. It was like a 2,000 word email that was like, hi Pavan, I'm looking to secure funding for my OSCP. I think it would bring a lot of recognition to the team. Here's my study plan, here's the schedule, here's how much it's gonna cost, blah, 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 blah. And I got one line back that was literally, lol, I'm not reading this. Send it back with your bottom line up front. Okay? He's a busy guy, right? I get it. But that's a lesson that stuck with me because, Pavan is one example of somebody who's very busy. But there are many others who are also very busy, right? A lot of the people you work with will be busy. They all have their own roles and responsibilities to take care of. So think about the economy of reading and think about your messaging, your communication. If you can get something across and be more concise, you should. I'm waiting for Pavan to light up the chat and roast me a little bit here. All right, let's talk nonverbals. You guys ever heard of body language? Yeah? Okay. Nonverbals are really important. You can tell a lot about how engaged people are or what they're thinking about, the current session or, how they're responding to your communication. Like Zhang's on his phone, so I know he's not really listening to me. But, that's the thing. It's important to pay attention to that stuff because we work and live in a weird time where we have things like hybrid work. And I don't mean to bug you, you can do whatever you do. Hybrid work means that you have to pay attention to things like, who's on webcam, how are they sitting, what are they looking at, like, are they looking sideways at the monitor, because you will be able to sort of tune your communication better and communicate more effectively if you can read the room, if you understand how people are responding to whatever it is that you have to say, right? Body language is kind of this weird communication method where a lot of people do it unintentionally, okay? You might not mean to be saying that you're not really listening or you're not receptive to the messaging, but if you see people crossing their arms, okay, it immediately presents like a physiological response to your communication that you can see. Or if you see people lean back in their chair, they're probably relaxing. Like, that's stuff to pay attention to. Body language is a super interesting topic area that we can't get all the way into today, but it is really important. It's something to consider about. A couple of things for you to think about. First and foremost, eye contact, whether you're in person or online. It's very important. It makes a big difference, right? If I see that I have a client who's like darting around and like they're looking at other stuff, or even, with coworkers and whatever, I know they're probably working on other stuff. And knowing that, I'm probably going to change how I'm asking my questions. In fact, I might even call on their name directly next time that I ask a question, because I know they're probably not listening, right? So if I want them to pay attention to the question that I have, I am going to say their name. And that's tuning my communication. It's the same kind of thing as posture. You can tell a lot about what a person is thinking about your current meeting, conversation, dialogue, whatever, based on how they're sitting, how they're reacting, right? If people are leaning back, they're probably, a little more relaxed. If people are sitting really upright, really, stiff, maybe they're nervous. If people are slouched over in their chairs, maybe they don't care. Like there are things that you can infer from body language about how your messaging is being received that can help you better tune your communication as you go. Another interesting thing, gestures. Okay, so hand gestures. For those of you in the room, you'll see I have open hands. Okay, open hands means I have something to share, like literally. If I'm coming to you with open palms, it means, I'm bringing good stuff. I've got kindness to share. I've got a message, or I've got something, to give to you. That's the idea. Gestures, whether it's with hands, whether it's, eyebrows, things like that. Like you see somebody raise their eyebrows, like they don't believe you, right? You've just said something incredulous. You see somebody nodding their head, they agree with you, right? You can take a lot from those simple gestures. Even though you might not think about it, there's a lot there. Body language is a very interesting area. Facial expressions as well. Some people are really good. They have a good poker face and, they won't let you know what they're thinking through their face. But a lot of people, You know, if you start smiling uncontrollably when I say something funny on a call, or even myself, I get in trouble for this all the time with clients that I'm quite close with, right? Like I'm not one to shy away from a smile. So if a client says something that I'm like, that is real cooked, you know, I'm letting out a wry smile. It happens, right? But that says a lot. It's a sign of comfort. It's, you know, paying attention to the facial expressions. It can tell you a lot about how a person is thinking or feeling about whatever it is that you're saying. A couple of things, strategies that you can try to do to quickly build rapport and to kind of enhance your communications. Mirroring. Anybody ever heard of mirroring before? Yeah? Go for it. What is it?
It's like you say, like you repeat what somebody just said, and you kind of do like some similar actions.
Sure.
If they like brush their hair, then you do the same thing.
Yeah.
For some reason, that makes them feel more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely it does. So mirroring, looking at, you know, what your audience is doing and kind of copying them a little bit. It makes you fit in, right? You become part of the pack. Like if somebody sees commonality in the way that you're physically behaving, they become more comfortable around you. Like that's a thing. So mirroring expressions, mirroring, you know, the way that people speak, the way that they sit, the way that they move. Like that's a big thing. Like you look like you belong when you're able to mirror a little bit to some degree, right? People find comfort in commonality. So that's an interesting thing to look for opportunities to do. Think about how you're dressing, right? Like, you know, you want to look like you fit in. Same idea with mirroring. Demonstrating engagement. So lots of people here nodding their head while I'm talking. That shows active listening, right? You're paying attention to what I've had to say. You're nodding your head. You are showing agreement. That demonstrates you are engaged. Demonstrating engagement can happen in more than one way. It's not just your head, right? That is the body language kind of thing. When you tilt your head, it says to me, I've just said something that's caught your interest and you're thinking about it. Like that's a thing that I can see. That's a thing that you can do to show that you're giving somebody serious thought, right? Demonstrate your engagement. It goes a long way to building rapport quickly and making sure that people believe you are listening to them. Dress appropriately. So I mentioned mirroring, fitting in, looking like you belong. You know, this is a soft skill, being able to tune your attire up and down. I'm not here in a suit today, am I? Right? When you are, you know, considering kind of the soft skills, things like being able to recognize what's the attire, what's appropriate for me to be hanging out with these people, how should I be speaking to these people, what diction should I use, what selection of words do I need? It all kind of comes from the same place. You want to fit in. Dressing appropriately is very important in the workplace. If you are going to be at a client site, you should be dressed to the same degree the client is. If you're overdressed, you're going to make people feel uncomfortable. If you're underdressed, you're going to look like a goof, right? So you kind of want to hit that sweet spot. This is a skill in and of itself. Pay attention to it. Lastly, using silence. How many times have I said in this presentation?
Just now.
Okay. Yeah, maybe 1, 2, 3-ish. But I've used a lot more pauses, a lot more silence than I have sound to kind of fill the void in speaking. That's not because I'm a practiced public speaker. I don't like public speaking, believe it or not. Instead, I think something really interesting is, you know, silence can make you sound a lot smarter than you really are, because it looks like you're thinking about what you're saying before the words are coming out of your mouth. If you can take a meaningful pause that is observable, people hear that gap in your speech, that says to them, you've thought about what's about to come out of your mouth. You've taken the time to consider what you have to say. That shows intelligence. That shows kind of an emotional intelligence that I think a lot of people overlook. So practicing your speech is another really important thing, not just in how you speak casually or, you know, when you're up on a pedestal like this or whatever, doing public speaking, but in general, using silence effectively, it can make you seem a lot smarter than you might actually be. Speaking from experience, of course. Think about it. Silence is important. Use the gap. You can leverage that for your own good instead of filling the space with ums and ahs and whatever else you might actually do. With that said, let's talk a little bit about using your soft skills to stand out from the crowd, right? I promised you guys that we wanted to talk a little bit about the job hunt, kind of how you can hack that process a little bit. I think this is a good time to get into it. Let's start first with building your personal brand. Personal branding is super important. Everybody ever heard that term, personal branding, before? Okay. The idea of your personal brand is your image. It's who you are and who you are seen as, right? You should, during this talk, think about for a moment, what is your personal brand? Who is your personal brand, right? You can kind of think through what your personal brand might currently be by asking yourself, who am I seen by first? Where am I seen, right? Am I on social media? Who's looking at my profile? Why are they looking at my profile? And what are they seeing when they look there? Are they seeing that, my profile is super undercooked? Are they seeing that my profile is very detail oriented? Are they seeing that I'm a super technical resource in one, specific silo of security? Are they seeing something else? And then consider the delta between that, right? How can I be recognized the way that I want? So do you need to do things like pursuing certifications? Or do you need to do things like joining ISSessions as a club? Or do you need to do things like speaking at events? And to be recognized the way that you want to be, what do you have to do? For a moment, think about a word, maybe a role, a label you want to have when people think about you. For me, in my career, one of the words that was kind of foundational to my starting career in consulting was an architect. I wanted to be a person who, when people thought of somebody who designs things, somebody who constructs complexity, somebody who builds something interesting, right? I wanted to be thought of as an architect, somebody who could tie all that together. If you have something like this in mind, that kind of a role or that kind of a label or a word, you should think about, what do those people do? How do I do stuff like that to be able to build your personal brand into that direction that you want? That's a very important thing. It's why I put it first. Think about your personal brand. It matters a lot during the job hunt, because the first thing that a person like me as a manager is going to do when I'm looking at your resume is go, what is this person going to do for me? How do they fit the mold of the role that I have? If I can see very transferably that I'm hiring for a tester role and your personal brand is leaning really heavily into testing, that's great. Alternatively, if I can see that maybe you're leaning really far into the soft skills side, that means, this is a client-facing resource that has strategic value. That's aligned with my long-term goals for the role that I'm hiring in. Think about your personal brand. It's one of the first things that I look for when I'm trying to suss out who's who on a resume. Because I tell you, I learn a lot more about somebody by looking at their social media and how they present themselves and the personal brand that they've built for themselves than I ever do from what the contents of their resume contains. Especially if they've got a whole bunch of stuff on the second page. Most of that stuff doesn't get looked at unless I'm interested in your personal brand, right? The next one. This one probably seems really obvious, but I assure you it's not. Produce high quality application materials. If you guys are doing job hunting, you're preparing application packages for your companies that you're applying to, your quality of your application package is very apparent to a seasoned technical reviewer. If you are somebody applying into a technical role and you're planning on working with other technical resources, many of them are going to be looking at your resume and your application package very critically. They're going to be looking for simple mistakes. And so you should tailor your packages first to the role and the company that you're applying to. If you haven't done your homework, you're not going to be able to do this effectively. Fortunately, as security folks, we understand what OSINT is, which means we should know how to do some research on an interviewer or on an employer before we actually go in for the interview, right? First thing first, tailor your application package. If I'm hiring for a consultant position in my team, am not going to be looking for a software developer, frankly. So if you give me an application package that the headline is seasoned software developer, and your cover letter is talking about all your software development internships, that's a no. I don't want that. I'm looking for a penetration tester, or I'm looking for a strategic consultant, somebody who has actually read the job description of my role. So tailor, first and foremost, produce new application packages for each position. You should not be giving a resume that you've built for penetration testing for a SOC job. You're gonna have a bad time. Cover letters, they are an opportunity for you to tell a story, okay? Stories are very relatable. One of the best ways that you can get a message across is by telling people a story. What was the first thing I did in this talk? I told you guys my story of pivoting from environmental toxicology to illustrate the transferability of the communication skills, okay? Narratives are a very, very compelling sort of literary device, if you will, to be able to get your meaning into a format that people can digest easily and come back to. They will remember the story. They might not remember some random fact that you give them about yourself. They will remember if you have a cool story behind you, right? Your cover letters are an opportunity for you to tell your story and to demonstrate why you are very well aligned specifically to this role that you're applying to. You probably shouldn't reuse a cover letter. You might have elements that you reuse, but the whole thing, if you're submitting one cover letter to 6 jobs, you're gonna have a bad time. Same deal, right? Cover letters are an opportunity, take them. In fact, a lot of students don't. They don't submit cover letters, and I think that's goofy. Because again, when I get a package that shows me somebody has put some serious conscious thought into the position that they've applied for, they've written a thoughtful cover letter, they've given me something compelling that makes them jump off the page as a person, that is leaps and bounds ahead of when I just get a cold resume with nothing on it, right? Triple check your spelling, grammar, formatting, and accuracy. Straight up, maybe it's because I'm a grammar stickler. I do a lot of technical writing, a lot of reviewing and editing. I think that this stuff just shows that you don't care, frankly. Like, if I see this stuff in your application package, yeah, mistakes happen, but not for really important stuff like this. Mistakes don't just like happen when client deliverables are going out, and they can't in the real world, right? In fact, in our line of work, in some jobs, you know, one mistake is all it takes, right? So you do need to be detail oriented, especially for this stuff. It matters. And again, it is tied to your personal brand. It's very important. So triple check. Don't just double check, triple check. Make sure it's good. And if you're not happy with your own triple check, get a trusted reviewer. It's easy to do. There are lots of people like me who do resume reviews and stuff on LinkedIn. You can go to your peers. You can go to your professors even. Many of them will do this for you. Seek advice from a trusted reviewer, because your triple check might be very good, but somebody else's interpretation of your materials and their review, their lens, is different. And sometimes that can give you value. So seek advice. Prepare for your interviews effectively. First things first. The absolute first question that I always ask to candidates interviewing for co-op positions in cyber defense. Well, in cyber in general. And this isn't, you know, I'm not giving you guys a leg up here, okay? I ask, which pillar of KPMG's cyber practice do you see yourself working in? KPMG has 5 pillars. If a student that I'm interviewing can't name the pillars, or at least one of them that they want to work in, you know what that says to me? That says they haven't even been to KPMG Cyber's homepage, because that is the first thing that you see. It is literally 5 boxes. When I ask a question like that, I'm not trying to trick people. It's genuine. It's pretty straightforward. Where do you see yourself fitting in? We've got 5 big teams here, at least 5. Where do you see yourself? If somebody can't answer it, that says, I didn't care enough to do research on your company and how you work. And I don't know who you are, and I don't know what this job is. I'm not checked out at that point, but I'm definitely skeptical, right? Why do I want to hire somebody who doesn't want to even take the bare minimum to go to our homepage? Tough question, but it's easy if you come prepared. OSINT. We all know what OSINT is, right? Not unfamiliar to anybody? Open source intelligence. Look up your interviewer. You might find you have some common ground, mutual friends, things that you can use to break the ice and kind of control the narrative a little bit. Start things off on an easier tone. It's a good thing to do, but it also means if you're going to interview with somebody who you don't know, maybe you know enough about them that you can find some common ground, or you can ask them questions about their background if you ever need to get out of a tricky situation. you can really lean into the knowledge that you've gained by preparing for your interview and maybe steer things back onto the rails if they ever kind of go off. So do some research. Do OSINT sweep on your interviewer, on your employer, potentially, right? Next thing, anticipate questions. It's not just enough to drill yourself or your friends with technical questions off a flashcard, because that's not how interviews go, right? If you've got an interviewer who's reading off a piece of paper and they're going through a standard set of questions with you, you're probably not going to be getting that job. Not unless it's a real big company and they have a very strict process. We have two portions to our interviews, right? Part of it is some of those standard questions, but we kind of go based on, we have a pool. The interviewer is kind of up to pick, whichever ones kind of fit the candidate best and what we're most interested to hear about. But if somebody's just reading off a, question by question by question by question, are they really engaged in you? Probably not so much. Have they looked at your resume? Maybe. You can't really tell if they're not asking questions about your background, right? So instead of preparing with, drilled questions, technical stuff, things that are could be on a flashcard, think more about what kinds of questions would this interviewer want to ask a candidate? What kind of team does this interviewer lead? Or what is the motive that this interviewer has? If you're speaking to an HR person, you can expect some very different questions than if you're speaking to a technical reviewer like me, right? So think about the motivations. Think about what kinds of questions will they ask and anticipate them. Come up with thoughtful responses in advance. If somebody's going to ask you about, your education experience, like an HR person, they're checking your minimum qualifications. You can anticipate, what are they going to want to know about me as a candidate? They're going to ask me, do I have, my PR? Am I eligible to work in Canada? Do I have, prior employment with this company? All those logistical questions that they need to check off because they're an HR interviewer, right? Versus a technical interviewer, oh, well, if I've done some LinkedIn stalking and you guys see me, I'm in cyber defense, I'm a manager here. Maybe I'm going to ask you questions about technical security assessments. Maybe I'm going to ask you about, tell me about penetration testing. What do you know about, what's your workflow? Things like that. Consider your audience. Again, this all comes back to understanding the audience. Some of those core communication skills. Anticipate the questions, prepare thoughtful responses. You will see much more competent and capable if you do that. Practice your speaking and your interviewing skills. An interview is best conducted, in my opinion, as a conversation. If you can make something conversational where there's back and forth, that means you've got them engaged. If it's transactional, question, response, that's probably not as good of an interview. You're not going to get as much out of them, and they're certainly not going to pull as much out of you. So give them something to work with. Practice your speaking so that you're more confident, more comfortable having conversations with these strangers, right? And as far as your interviewing skills go, think about the body language, those other kind of soft skills on the communication side, constantly using plain language, asking, did they understand your response? Things like that. Those are good skills to practice. They will improve your efficacy in an interview. The last thing is turn questions you don't know the answer to into a learning opportunity. How many people have ever been asked a question that they did not have an answer for? Cool. For everybody in the Discord, every single person, including me, has their hand up in the room, okay? Questions that you don't know the answer to are not a death sentence. You guys are students, which means you're being interviewed with the expectation that you're probably pretty good, but there's lots to learn. We don't expect perfection out of students, that kind of thing, right? You're not interviewing for senior roles where you're making big budget decisions and everything needs to be perfect, put it that way. That said, something that shows a lot of maturity and a lot of emotional intelligence, and that I honestly don't see students do enough, is when they don't have an answer prepared, they don't turn it into a learning opportunity. They don't ask, hey, actually I'm not familiar with that. Would you mind explaining that concept to me? It's a great way to turn what is normally a train wreck nightmare scenario where somebody slams you with a question you've got no clue about into something actually constructive, and that shows that you have that emotional intelligence and maturity to say, you know what, I actually need some help here. I don't know that one. Can you fill me in? Right? It's a great strategy to kind of turn that nightmare moment on its head and turn it into something that benefits you, both short and long term. Interviewers will look at that and go, that was a good pivot, right? That's a good way to handle a tricky situation. Maybe they would do that in front of a client, as well as for you to then glean some technical learning from somebody much more seasoned, much more experienced, right? So think about that. Find those opportunities to turn the disaster scenario into actually something quite positive and constructive. Leverage your network. Everybody has heard this phrase. It's not what you know, it's who you know. There is some truth in this, okay? The reality of the matter is, you do still need to be technical, you need to be knowledgeable, and you need to be good at what you do. That said, if you're just good at what you do, and you don't take the time to get to know people, and you don't take the time to pursue the social opportunities that you have, you will not be afforded the same privilege and the same opportunities as people who do pursue those social engagements, right? Opportunities come from all places. It's a great example of part of why I'm here. I'm here to meet you guys. I don't know who is going to be my next employee. I don't know who's going to be my next employer. But when I'm thinking about the context of my career, taking the time to make these new connections is very meaningful, because this kind of activity, it affords you the privilege of opportunities that people who don't take these chances, they will never see these, right? Some will ultimately only come up through these kinds of social engagements. A really good way to find these opportunities is seeking and providing mentorship. So whether you are acting as a mentor for lower year students, or whether you are acting as a mentee and you've sought out a mentor in cyber, somebody more experienced than you, there's a lot to be gained. And ultimately, this is one more pathway now in your sort of, career opportunities, your toolbox, so to speak. One more person you can go to and say, hey, you heard anything cool? Any new interesting opportunities come across your desk? Anything that, we might both benefit from being involved with? Those kinds of things, very, very good way to find those opportunities, seeking and providing mentorship. Attending industry conferences and events. So ISSessions is a great start, but going beyond just the constraints of your school is important. How many people here went to Sector, B-Sides, DEF CON in the past, anything like that? So about half the room. Your school club is a pretty small slice of the pie, and granted, the regional community and InfoSec, not that big of a pie altogether when it comes to Toronto. Big, but not that big. Taking the time, again, to go out of your way, attend these conferences, see people that you know. If you bump into me at a conference, I'm probably going to remember that you were here, right? That's common ground that you now have with somebody else. That's a connection, it's a story, it's something that, could bring you an opportunity in the future, and you just never really know. So take the time, go to those things. They're usually free for students. Continue coming to ISSessions. Look for other relevant security-related events in the area. Task is a great one to visit, with the OWASP chapter, or Sector B-Side, ShmooCon, all kinds of stuff. DEF CON, if you can get out to Vegas, is a great time, right? So take the time, attend the conferences. Grow your network of peers. So, not a flex, okay? This is a small number, but this is my LinkedIn connections, okay? Not a flex. 1,300 is pretty small. That said, it's what I've earned. It's what I've cultivated over years and years. You don't just pop up to this overnight or whatever, right? And that's the thing, is it takes constant effort. I think that taking the time, whether you're adding one new person on LinkedIn every day, or you're sending an email, or whether you're meeting somebody at a conference, that kind of thing, it adds up. It's cumulative, right? It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You grow your network over time, those opportunities will come to you in spades in the future. If you don't, then they can't. So start now. With that said, that's kind of the end of what I want to talk about, both in terms of the soft skills that I think are really important for cyber, as well as the sort of standing up in the crowd when you're doing the job hunting, some of the things that I think are very relevant for your consideration. I will open the floor up and the chat up for questions, starting now.
I got a question for you in terms of the cover letters. So I am guilty of in the past for when applying for jobs. We're not submitting them just because, not so much that I don't want to write them, it's just that I have found a million different ways of what's the best way to write a cover letter.
True.
some ones that have really stood out to you. What are things that made you want to read it and then like continue to engage with that person for an interview?
Sure. So for anybody who didn't hear that in the chat, the question was, what are some of the contents of like the best cover letters that I've seen, and what made me want to continue engaging with that person based on the contents of that cover letter? Is that's fair?
Yep.
So I think, again, narratives, stories are really easy to get invested in when you read them in a cover letter. If you're telling me your personal story of, you know, how you got into security, or, you know, why you're here now and what you're looking for, it makes it relatable. You're sharing a piece of who you are with me. And that means that I can get emotionally invested in somebody on this page rather than, you know, just reading something that GPT wrote, right? So I think narratives are a really effective vehicle for you to tell that story in a cover letter. Talk about, you know, you're a student at Sheridan, you're interested in security because you had a friend who worked in the industry, or you had a personal experience with it growing up. That stuff is memorable. It makes somebody stand out. And I think that's the best way to start is, you know, your cover letter is kind of dual purpose. One is get the hook in. You want somebody to actually get interested in you as a person. The other is you can verbalize in your cover letter why you are the slam dunk choice, the absolute best pick for the role. You can say, I've had one-to-one experience doing the roles and responsibilities that you've described in your letter when I did X, Y, and Z at this other company, or, you know, in this class we did a project where I did exactly that. And that gives me, again, a story, something to remember about you, and a very tangible, like one-to-one of like, I could see this person doing that thing in my job. So use narratives. I think it's a really easy way to kind of share who you are. And second, use the opportunity the cover letter presents to tie your experiences and your story to the roles and responsibilities of the job. And then you have a very memorable cover letter.
Awesome, thank you.
Kind of like the opposite of his. What's like something in like a resume or cover letter that makes it like an immediate throwaway? Like
You put the wrong company in your cover letter and it's in the garbage. Like I get it, mistakes happen, but if you're gonna make mistakes like that on your cover letter, what are you gonna do when I put you on client work? Can I trust you to do work for me? Right? So pay attention. Like, yeah, that's an instant no. Lots of silly typos in grammar. Again, same deal. It's like, if I hire this person, I'm gonna have to fix every one of their reports that they give me. I don't have time for that. Nobody's got time for that. So that's a hard no, right? So that's why I say triple check your work. Have a trusted reviewer take a look, right?
In terms of the resume, like when I was looking for my co-op, one of the sections, the skills section, was one which I was constantly trying to tweak and reformat. Eventually I just got rid of it and tried putting it everywhere else. Do you have like any advice for a skills section? Should I include it going forward? And if so, how should I format it?
So, yeah, I think that formatting a skills section is something, it's a little subjective, right? Everybody has different tastes. What I really like to see in a skills section is I want it to be focused. I don't want a generic skills to say like teamwork, leadership, like that doesn't tell me anything really. Everybody can put that in there and it is what it is. What I like seeing, is a relevant skills section. And I say relevant because if you label it specifically relevant skills, that implies to me you've tied that directly to my job posting. You've tied that to my role and responsibilities as I've described them. Then I know, okay, if I have like a hit list of things, keywords that I'm looking for in my posting, you've probably done some review and your resume is tailored for that. So I would say relevant skills first is the label that I would use. And it should be relevant to the job you're applying to, tune that. If you're applying to a software developer position, your relevant skills is probably going to include your languages. So maybe you could say you know how to program in Python, C++, C#, whatever. By comparison, if you're going to say apply to a security operations center role, maybe you, in your relevant skills, should be talking about how you're competent with digital forensics toolkits like Autopsy or that kind of thing. So relevant skills. I also think that as far as what kind of piece of the pie in a whole resume that a skills section is going to take up, probably no more than 10-20%, right? Like it shouldn't be huge, it shouldn't be overbearing. The reason being, it should be a quick, concise, direct summary of all the skills that I need to know that you have to meet the minimum requirements of my job.
Cool.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Relating to your point about reading your audience, I find that when I'm presenting and I catch someone, and there's always going to be someone who may not be giving me the full attention, I tend to obsess over that, and then it affects my presentation. So let's say there's like 3 people that are paying attention and like 2 that aren't. I start to like trip out, and now I'm freaking out because I'm thinking about what they're thinking. You know, how would you handle something like that?
The best trick is don't look at the audience. Okay, I give Zhang a hard time because I know him and whatever. But genuinely, don't look at the audience. Okay, eye contact is a tool, but it's not the only thing that you should be doing. And more importantly, you don't look at the same person the whole time. I am looking at the back of the room half the time. I am not actually looking one-to-one, person-to-person, whatever, like making locked-in eye contact all the way through, because it's not economical. And again, it's distracting when you notice that somebody like Zhang is on his phone, okay? But regardless, use that as a strategy, right? Look into the corner in the back. People are gonna assume you're making eye contact with someone else, but there's nobody sitting back there. How many times did I look over there during the presentation, right? So don't look people in the eye all the time. Use it tactfully and be intentful about it. Certainly, I would say if you are paying less attention to the people who are occupied, you yourself will be less distracted. Focus on the blank space behind their heads. Don't look at what they're doing with their hands or their computers or whatever. Make sense? Any other questions, folks? Yeah, go for it.
Would you find that it would be smart to mirror someone when you're just meeting them for the first time?
As much as you're able to. Mirroring, like physically, is one of the quickest ways to build rapport with somebody on short notice. I don't know anything about you, you don't know anything about me, but if I see that physically there's some commonality in like how we're greeting each other, like we go to shake each other's hands, we both use the right, that starts things off on a good note, right? There are simple things that you can do when you're mirroring. You know, if you see somebody's very active with their head, you can do that too, right? If they're nodding up and down and they start speaking, you can do that too, right? People will recognize that kind of thing, and they, whether they consciously realize it or not, will feel more of an affinity for you or more trust in what you have to say if they recognize something that you do that is common. Of course. I see a question from Jay. Hold on 1 second. I can't see it on the computer, so I'm going to pull it up in the server. One moment. So the question is, on the topic of growing your personal brand, are there any specific certs, general things students should participate that stand out when entering a professional environment? So I don't think certifications are necessary. In fact, I think it's in my slides somewhere where I call out, hold on, where is it here? Your personal branding, I think that's where it is. Where did I put this? It's in here somewhere. Regardless, I don't think that you need certifications. Reality of the matter, your employer should probably be paying for your certifications rather than you doing it out of pocket. Certifications are a great way to distinguish yourself if you do have the financial means, but not everybody has that privilege. If you have, the means, go for it. You'll learn a lot and you will definitely set yourself a leg up, but it isn't required. Instead, again, what I would focus on is demonstrating the transferability of your skills, the applicability of your learning in academia. Showing that you have learned how to learn and that you can become a valuable asset is much more important for being a student, being hired into an entry-level position, than I would say coming in ready to go immediately is. When I hire a senior, I have an expectation that they're coming in with experience and credibility and knowledge that I don't have to teach them how to ride the bike. I can just give them a push and they'll go down the hill. When I hire a co-op student, it's very different, and the expectation is very different at the early stage of the career. Now, as far as some things that students I think should do or could do pretty accessibly to kind of improve their personal branding, first off, look at your social media. Like, reflect on it for a moment. What does it actually say about you? Because that's one of the first things that I do when I look at a candidate more seriously. I'm going to look at their LinkedIn. I'm going to look at their GitHub. I'm going to look at their Twitter. I'm going to look at who they follow on Twitter, right? If I see a security person, and they've applied with a security Twitter, and I'm interested to know, like, where do you get your news from? Okay, even sometimes that's a question that I ask. If you look at your social media, you reflect, how does that showcase your personal brand? That's an important thing. Another thing is start a blog. Like, write a Medium article about something that you learned in your class or a home lab project that you've taken on. That's something that you can even provide to an employer as like, hey, take a look at this really cool thing that I did. In fact, that's part of what landed me my first job in the industry, was showcasing a home lab that I had built for one of my courses. We built an attack and detection lab in one of our third year courses that I happened to have ready to go. I said, hey, do you want to see the home lab actually? Like, I have it on, it's running right now. And I was able to give like a walkthrough of that as kind of like a portfolio project. I think all of that stuff, showing kind of the learning outside of the classroom, certainly the consideration of your personal brand, much more important than having certifications and letters after your name, because most of that, I mean, doesn't do anything for me other than tell me that you've done an exam, right? Any other questions, folks? Go for it.
In terms of like your speaking skills, like teaching yourself how to not say articulating your words, slowing down, like doing pacing, whatever. How did you like learn that? Did you do it yourself, or was it just like experience?
Practice.
Yeah, just like speaking in different events or whatever. That kind of
Speaking at events, speaking with superiors, certainly it is a practiced skill. You need to give it conscious effort. You can do that practicing with your friends. You can take the opportunities that you have through your academic program to consciously practice with things like in-class presentations. A lot of people look at things like their presentations, their assignments, their projects in school, and they think, oh, this is just something I got to do to get the degree. Not the case. Every one of those end of semester presentations that you have is an opportunity for you to practice your public speaking. Every one of the reports that you write is an opportunity to practice your technical writing and your review skills, right? And that's the thing. People don't look at it as one of those things, and they don't give it the conscious effort it deserves as a practiced skill. But that's also where you find the biggest gaps and sort of the standout candidates is the people who have considered and consciously practiced their speaking skills. They stand out. You notice when people are good speakers. That's because it's a skill that a lot of people recognize as being desirable and something that people look up to, right? But it also makes you a more effective communicator, make you better at your job. So practice, 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 practice more. Take every opportunity you can to practice. Recognize the opportunities that you already have and seek out new ones as well.
Just sort of in regards to practicing speaking, members, they are free to present the news at our meetings.
Yeah.
So if you guys are interested, we got a form in the Discord server, or you can just reach out to any of the execs if you're interested.
Yeah, so for anybody who didn't hear all of that in the chat, you all have speaking opportunities through ISSessions to present the news here. And it's an amazing opportunity because you get an audience here, and it's scary. You get to stand up at the podium, and it's a great time. Even if you don't like public speaking, it's a valuable skill to have, and you get a lot more comfortable with it the more you practice. The same with anything. So take the time, take the opportunities. You won't have these kinds of opportunities come up nearly as much once you're done school. So pursue them. Take advantage of them. Any other questions, folks? In the chat, in the class.
On top of your personal brand, I've heard it thrown around a couple times, but is it I don't want to say a bad idea, but is it actually something that stand out to have like your own website?
Totally.
Like
Yeah.
post like your blog, things that you're working on, like even if there weren't a lot of people looking at it, like it's something that you've been maintaining for like a year or 2 or 3 or however long you've been working on it.
It looks great because it shows that you're passionate about what you do and who you are, and that you are putting that forward and actually sharing that with other people. It's important. Again, when you think about your personal brand, it's not just what do you want to do and what role do you resonate with, or what do you have in mind for yourself. It is, again, how you are seen by other people. So maintaining, for example, things like if you're active on Hack the Box and you do Hack the Box write-ups or videos or something on your own YouTube channel, it doesn't matter if you're getting a lot of views. If you show that to an employer, they're going to look at that and they go, wow, this is a really genuine person. This is somebody who really lives this stuff, right? They're here for that. It shows an authenticity and, you know, again, who you are, genuinely your personal brand. It's a great way to showcase it. Yeah. Any other questions?
Kind of similar to the personal brand question. If you do things outside of the security field, should you also advertise that to your employers? Like if you're maintaining a blog or a channel outside of security, do you think that should be something that's presented to them?
It really depends, which is a bit of a cop-out answer, I know. Contextually, right? So one thing that I often talk about when I'm introducing myself, I talk about my weird COVID hobbies. Anybody pick up any weird COVID hobbies? So my 3 COVID hobbies were coffee, cocktail, and custom mechanical keyboards. Okay, I brought one with me if you guys want to see it. It's really cool. It's something memorable, right? Now you guys are gonna remember, oh, Todd said he's into custom keyboards, right? Like that's a thing. In fact, I have clients now who like they've built keyboards and they're like, yo, can you bring, you know, one of those in each time and like show me a new one, that kind of thing, right? It's memorable. So sharing that bit of personal information about yourself, it can help you stand out when you're interviewing, or it can help you sort of become more recognizable, but it depends on the context. Again, how well do you know this person? What, you know, why are you sharing this? Are you talking about, do they ask you a question, for example, about like, who are you outside of work in the classroom? Like, what are your hobbies? What are your interests? And of course, what is the perception of those hobbies is another thing to think about. Like, what are people gonna think about if I tell them I play World of Warcraft? Or what are people gonna think about if I tell them that I like cocktails, right? On one hand, you might have somebody, depending on who it is, you say, oh, I'm really into cocktails. Like I, you know, like having a cocktail on the weekends or something, trying fun, new, interesting ones. Craft Cocktails is a really cool club, really cool scene, whatever. Other people might look at that and go, ah, he's an alcoholic for sure, right? So again, you gotta consider the context, right? Or if I tell somebody I'm into custom mechanical keyboards, some people are gonna be like, oh, that's so cool, right? Like, what a creative, interesting hobby. Other people are gonna go, what a dork, right? Like, this guy's a total nerd. So consider the context. What are you sharing about yourself? Who are you sharing it with? How are they going to receive whatever you're sharing about yourself? What are the interpretations there? So it depends. Make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Clear as mud?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all I got for you folks. So enjoy the rest of the evening and I'll hand it back over.
Thank you so much for coming out. Really appreciate having you all here. I think we might be having a room change for next session possibly.
Yeah.
So we'll post it in the Discord for where we're going to be. It'll be 2 weeks from now, so we'll let you guys know with more information. But thank you so much for coming out, and we'll be happy to see you in 2 weeks.